Hello and welcome to Space Engineers. I'm going to be kicking off a new series here, just doing a playthrough of Space Engineers on survival mode. As you can see here, we are playing on .130, and yeah, it's a game I've been playing a fair bit for the last week or so, and really enjoying. And I thought, I'll actually start a series and we'll see how we go. So let's go and have a look. We're going to do a custom world here, and we're going to go for the star system setup. We are going to be playing on survival, and I'm just going to set this to offline. Let's see. Now, if you are starting out, I would definitely recommend going for the safe environmental hostility. The meteor showers can really disrupt your early game a substantial amount, and they're very hard to defend against. Even getting a few turrets up, you're still going to end up taking some damage. So yeah, definitely worthwhile setting that to safe. In fact, even I think experienced players will probably not want to get disrupted, especially in the early game with that. And we are going to run a few different mods here, so got a whole bunch of them installed. Now the ones we're actually going to use though, at least initially, and these are kind of just sort of quality of life things. So automatic ore pickup is a huge quality of life improvement. You don't get those little rocks just constantly floating there. As long as you've got enough inventory space, the rocks will automatically get picked up. So helps a great deal. We're also going to run the energy shields mod, and that's mostly just to make up for the fact that things like mining drills on small ships are really fragile. So we're going to have that on there, and that'll let us put a small amount of shields onto our mining vessels. And the other one, probably going to go twin grinders and twin welders because they're very, very, very convenient. And we'll go one more. Well, two more. Clear LCD. I do like that. We're going to have that. And where's the other? Clear camera screen is definitely another quality of life improvement. It just removes the overlay from cameras. And I want a drill mod as well. It's kind of it's probably going to be twin drills. Yeah, it's going to be twin drills. The other one that I have been using is this heavy mining drill. But you're not really going to be using that in early game, and the ones I've got here are really going to help us out in the early game. Alright, so I think that will do for the mods. Now, as far as other settings go, we are going to be playing on basically the defaults. So that's times 10 inventory, times 3 efficiency, times 3 speed, times 2 welding and grinding. Max objects, we're not really going to have a lot of objects floating around, so I'll just leave that as the default. Let's see, day duration, we'll leave that on 2 hours, although yeah, we might end up changing that around. And the other thing I'm going to do here, and I would recommend that you do this as well, is turn off cyberhounds. And I'm actually going to turn off cargo ships. I don't know whether it's been fixed in a sub patch, but I've had a lot of issues with cargo ships actually breaking my games. And until I turned them off, I was unable to do things like rename my vessels. So I think there's still some work needed on cargo ships before they're kind of happy. All right, so that's going to do us. I will change the name of that once we get going. But yeah, we'll get going and see if we can find ourselves a landing site. It does take a little while for Space Engineers to load in a modded game, but that's not too bad. Okay, so let's just have a quick look around. So we've got a lake over there. I'm really a big fan of actually starting bases on lakes because they do give you access to a lot of flat area to build your bases on. Let's have a look. What else have we got around? Looks like there's a lot of flat surface area that way. I'm thinking let's go that way. Just make sure the dampeners are on. But yeah, I'm thinking let's go over that way, and we'll kind of, so we won't be on a lake as such. We'll just land on some of this flat area around here. So the key things in choosing a landing site is access to, I suppose, the main resources we're going to need early on. So you want there to be some iron and some cobalt and some nickel nearby if you can. However, it's not that hard to go out and scout those. And, you know, early game, it's a little bit slow. But once we start getting some mining vessels, then, you know, we're going to be fine. So yeah, we just want to try and get over. In fact, even this sort of area is probably fine. You know, it's still relatively flat without being a lake. I think we'd be pretty happy there. And the surface is probably mostly going to be ice. So we will... we should find some useful... So ice is going to be important for us to get our first vessel to get into space. We're going to need to mine to convert that with our oxygen generators into hydrogen. So yeah, having a good supply of ice is pretty important as well. So you don't want to have to go too far for it. So yeah, this is definitely all relatively flat. So good base building terrain in my opinion. I'm just going to drop us down a bit. We'll see if we can't come in for a landing here. So I've got the auto lock turned off. That's what the one action is there. So we can actually get down close to the surface, then turn off the dampeners so we actually land flat. Just waiting for the thrusters to slow us down a little bit more. Yeah, so this is pretty flat, and in fact there's some resources right over there. So and another patch right there. So actually, let's see if we can get ourselves a bit closer. That rock there is probably going to be some gold as well, if I had to guess, just from its color more than anything else. I know it's cobalt. Okay, well that's fine. We can definitely use cobalt. But we've got a few different rocks around here, but I'm thinking let's go and park ourselves right next to those resource patches. Because those are most likely going to contain some very useful resources. If we can get some early access to uranium as well, that will help out the process a lot. So we won't have to rely as much on solar power. Alright, so we got a rock with some nickel there as well. The rocks can be pretty useful if they're you know, around, enough of them around. Let's just go and see what these patches are. And there's another one over there as well. All right, so this one is silicon and nickel. And we got a third resource here, or just the two? And magnesium. All right, so that would actually be pretty good. So that would give us ammunition supplies basically with that magnesium. We just need a little bit of iron to go with it. Iron is one of those things you need a lot of. And I mean a lot. Alright, so there's a rock with some cobalt. Just want to see what this patch is. Alright, we got silver. Uranium and cobalt. That's probably going to be it. Okay, so no iron as yet. But this does feel like it's a good area to kind of set up. Let's go and have a look at this patch. I'm conscious of how much power we're kind of going through here. Because it does take quite a lot of power to just keep floating around. And we're going to need that power to kind of get our base started up. Now we can, with what we have included in the ship by default, we can set up solar power. And I think we will probably do that. But it definitely helps to have a little bit of power left over to get started. Alright, so we got magnesium, we got iron in the rock. We got magnesium, nickel, and silicon here again. Well, the iron in that rock is definitely going to be helpful. I was kind of hoping to find a big patch of iron inside the ground here, though. Well, there's a lot more patches around. Like, we can see them from the air. There's one more patch. I can kind of see it on the... I think there is a patch there. Oh, yeah. Right there. Let's go and have a look. I want to set up right next to some iron. So I'm going to keep scouting around until we find a patch here with iron. It's really easy, and this is why one of the reasons I came for the snow terrain. It's really, really easy to see where the patches of resources are. Got a few rocks with iron there. And we got some more on the hill there of something. Iron. Awesome. So I'm just going to use the main engines here to kind of slow down. All right, so we got iron and gold here. Great. That's actually perfect. It's going to slide us across here a little bit. This is nice and flat, so it's going to be really, really easy to build up a base. Use those main engines to kind of slow us down a little bit more. All right, just going to come down very slowly for a landing. And turn off the dampeners so we just settle down, and then we can turn on auto lock. All right, and we're down on the ground. So now that we're actually settled and we're probably not going to move from here for a little while, we're just going to turn off a few of the things that we don't need. So to start with, let's grab all of the thrusters and we'll group those into, we'll call them thrusters. And we can also turn off the gyroscope as well. Although unless we're actually putting in input, it doesn't use much power. It uses 30 watts, which is not much. In fact, yeah, actually I'll leave it on because it consumes 30 watts. That's nothing. So make sure we got our thrusters off. Now, other thing we're going to do is, I'm going to take our helmet off for starters. I'm going to switch this guy to depressurize. And then we're going to open the door, which is going to blow out all of the atmosphere in here. Alright, but since we're on a planet that has an atmosphere, we don't need that thing pressurizing our ship. In fact, we don't even need it. This is not even capable of going into orbit, so let's just grind it down. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is just sort of a bit of housekeeping here, is we're going to make use of the programmable block on board. So we're going to go edit, we're going to go browse workshop, and this script, Taladin's inventory manager, is absolutely awesome. So we're going to remember and exit. Usually I don't need to change any settings in there. And then we're going to go up to the timer block that's included on the default ship as well. We're going to set the delay to 1, and we're going to set it up to execute the programmable block and then to start itself. So this is just makes something that repeats indefinitely, and then we'll trigger that. Now, basically what that does is it's going to automatically manage the inventories of everything. So I'm going to go in here, and this cargo container, I'm going to call storage Tim components on just compo, and then it will go and rename it to Tim component. And we get a second cargo container by default. So we're going to change this one to Tim ore and ingot. And what that will do is it will mean it will use the second storage container, which is this one up here, to store all of the ores and the ingots that we get. And this one will have all of the components. So it means when we run in the door here and open up this container, it's going to have everything we need. Right, anything we need to build, you know, solar panels, batteries, and everything else that's going to end up in this container. All right, the other thing to do, just go into this refinery, tell it not to use the conveyor system, and then change this to Tim ore. And then it will also manage creating resources in a priority order. And another thing we can do here is we can set this to Tim ingot. And that should... where are we? Show text public. Yep. Ingot inventory. Why have you not updated? Off and on. There we go. All right. So this will now show sort of the default quotas. So if we go and put a mixture of things in, this will actually go and automatically refine whatever resource we need the most of. As you can see, the default quota, we need a lot more iron than anything else. I'm also going to go and grab another LCD. Actually, we might change this one and use this one for the components. And we'll actually put another screen. Actually, we can just use this one. No, we'll move it. Oh. It tore down a lot quicker than I expected. So we'll put another LCD over here, assuming that it fits. I think it should. All right, and we'll use this one as the tin ore. All right, so then it gives us an idea of, you know, what it's going to do and which one it's working on, importantly. So it will actually tell us, and it's going to do this manually. So we put random things in there, and it will go and sort of convert things across. Actually, sorry, that's incorrect. Tin ingot is what I wanted. It's not updating all the time. There we go. All right. Great. So that's kind of set up. And something else that you can do with this is if you want to adjust the quotas, you can actually go in here and change the values. Now, it's not going to help us a lot for now, but later on we can actually use this to handle automatically managing our you know, auto production. But in order to do that, you need to set up a bunch of assemblers. And we'll actually use a different mod to do most of that later. But for now, that's fine. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over here and kind of dig down to this iron vein, because no matter what, we're going to need iron. It was here, wasn't it? Yep. All right. So let's see if we can find it. All right. It's 31 meters down. All right. It's a bit deeper than would be ideal, but we can definitely get there. So I'm just going to sort of pulse the right mouse button and just dig down a reasonably steep tunnel to get us down to the depths we want. You can see this is all ice. So if I go and hit that briefly, is that not spawner? Well, that's interesting. We're not getting any resources at all out of this. But it looks like it should be ice anyway. But that's not what we really need. So it's just important to have a way to get out of here. So we need to make sure we leave a little bit of power after we get down to that iron. It is pretty deep, and I normally would not suggest trying to mine something that deep by hand. But once we're down there the first time, getting it repeated times is not a big deal. But kind of to get started, we just need a little bit of iron, a little bit of cobalt, and a little bit of... All right, I'm going to move off to the side here. A little bit of iron, nickel, and cobalt will kind of get us started. All right, well, I'm going to come back once I manage to get down to this deposit and get a little bit of iron and get back to the base. I'll be back shortly. All right, so we're back at base now. As you can see, I've got a bunch of stone, a bunch of iron. We're not really interested in the stone too much now because it's going to be a little while until we get the reactor components. but we'll hang on to it anyway. So I'm going to put the iron in here, and you just heard the refinery start up. Now, if you remember, we set the refinery to use conveyor off. So that's actually Tim that's moving the items around and getting the refinery going. So yeah, it's going through, and it's basically making, you might have noticed for a moment there, it actually switched in and made some gravel as well. So it'll actually switch these resources around to kind of create a balanced amount of it. So if we go over here and have a look at what it's actually done. So it's actually, did I not update that? It must not count gravel as an ingot, but it's going and making primarily iron. Oh yeah, there it is, the stone ingot. So we've already got above the quota that it needed, so it's kind of shut that down. But it does do it in sort of a balanced way, so it's not just going to stop processing the stone and the iron just because, you know, it hit a quota. So it will keep it running all the time until it runs out, but it prioritizes them. So it will make the iron in preference to anything else, you know, if we don't have enough iron. But because it's already done all of the iron, it's now moved on to making the gravel instead, just to keep the refinery busy. All right, so the other thing we do need to get is some cobalt. Now we did see some on the way, but it's going to start to very quickly be pretty tedious to, you know, run on foot over to get these things. So I think it's a good idea pretty early on to make yourself a small rover. And you can do that with the parts you have included on the ship. So that's not really a problem. So what we'll do is we'll make a new small ship. And I actually need to get a few components. Oh, we've got a little bit of stuff. We might be okay. So we're going to need a couple of, just go to a new screen here. So we're going to need some regular armor blocks. We're going to need some light armor. We're going to need some wheels. And we're going to use the 3x3 suspensions. We're going to need some batteries. And I'm going to put solar panels on here so it can actually recharge itself. And what else? We're going to need some form of control. So maybe we could do it with a passenger seat and a remote control, but I do find that to be quite annoying to use. However, if we go with, say, a cockpit, we also require a lot more resources. So I think we will go for a passenger seat, despite the fact that it is more awkward to use. And well, let's go and set this up. So I'm thinking a small, sort of a small, you know, four-wheeled rover should get us a pretty good starting point. So we're going to make it a fairly wide wheelbase. All right, because the wider it is, the less prone it should be to rolling over. And when you're placing wheels, it's important to remember the piston section that you can see needs to be at the top, not at the bottom. So we're going to place that in. That's probably going to be too wide of a wheelbase, actually. Now that I look at it, let's go and... So we'll go back in one on each side. So we'll go one off here as well. There we go. And pretty much the purpose of this rover is going to be for us to go out there, collect whatever we need, and then bring it back here. So it's going to need a little bit of storage. So that's something else I need to add. And it's important, the way that the wheels work here is you need to be far enough away that the wheel can actually spawn in. Because if I'm standing too close, what happens... I'll just show you for demonstration purposes. If I'm standing too close, then it will actually fail to place down the wheel. And you can fix that, but you need a control point on the vehicle to actually fix it. So, you know, if you're doing this like I am right now, where everything is skeletal, then, you know, that's not really going to work too well. Okay, so we're going to need somewhere to control. We're going to make this look like a conventional car. I think that's going to be, we'll use a little bit of jetpack to kind of get up there. It would have been better if I had like a platform to do this on, but this will work. I don't have any interior plate to place this down, but we're going to have a seat sort of around here. It will probably be useful if we have a little bit of a platform just there, so we've actually got somewhere to stand on the rover to get on and off. And then to make it a little bit easier, we can also put just some ramp pieces there. So when it's sitting on the ground, you know, we can kind of jump up. Although you can quite easily just look at the seat and press F even from ground level. But while we're building that, it's also useful as well. So we don't actually need that there. Okay, so I want to put a couple of cargo containers on here. So we're going to search out cargo and we'll go for medium cargo containers. So I want to put them sort of, you know, reasonably central. What about... Alright, I need some more interior plate for this too. So we go and grab some of that. All right, and now we can put down our passenger seat. If we can get up on board. There we go. So right there, nice and central. Now, in order to actually control it, because passenger seats are not controllable, all right, they just allow you to ride on the vehicle, but they don't actually give you a control point. We're going to need a remote control. Like so. And we'll also need an antenna on here to give us some range. So we'll go and throw that on right here. I need small steel tubes to place that down. Yep, that should be fine. And then we'll put the solar panels kind of off the back. Or maybe, well, sitting on top of the cargo containers. Alright, we don't actually have any small steel tubes, so that's a good thing to actually go and make. Let's go and make like 20 of those. Alright, waste a little bit of hydrogen. Alright, so there's our antenna. Now we need to place 2 batteries. Thinking like that will be just fine. Now how did I place I placed them like that. Okay, that's perfect. So we could use a conveyor to hook these up, but I think in the early game, just having them like that will be fine. Later on, what we could do is take out this one block and replace it with a conveyor, and that will join up the 2 cargo containers. But a conveyor kind of needs quite a few components, so I'm not too worried about that in the early game. All right, and then if we can place this this solar panel. All right, we need to put a cube on top of each of these. There might actually need to be more like there. Let's have a look. Okay, so it looks like they go roughly central. So, all right, so this is going to need to be there. And that might not quite overlap. So I think for symmetry, we'll actually put the points on the outside there. So I'll just take this one down and place it again. There we go. All right, so I mean, there's potentially an issue here if we accelerate too hard, the solar panels could flip around and kind of break. But I think we should be okay with that. We'll just make sure we keep our power setting fairly low. So I'm going to go and grab all the bits and pieces to weld this up and get that done. And once that's done, we'll come back and kind of see how it all works. All right, guys, we're back. So as you can see, I've welded everything up. There's only there's two things I had to change. So the seat, I had to pull that out in order to weld some of the components. And there's really only the one change, which was I added an ore detector back here. Now, as far as resources went, there's only two things I deconstructed on the ship. The first is the ore detector that normally sits here. Since we already had... we'd already kind of scouted this out a little bit and worked out where we were going to land. And the other thing is I just went up here and pulled out this window on the back, just for a bit of silicon so I could make the radio components. But that was the only two things that were kind of destroyed in the ship. Everything else we either had already or we were able to make using some of that iron that I gathered. Right, so there's sort of one last thing we need to do before we kind of free this up, and that is set up the wheels. So I'm going to group these first as wheels. Now I've never kind of worked out a good way to explain this, but what I'm going basically the way that the suspension works, it kind of works along the lines of real world, but if you're not a car person, you're not really going to kind of understand what that means. But the kind of the easiest guide that I've found so far is basically if you're running something that is off-road, then you want a relatively low strength, so somewhere like around here, but a pretty high damping. All right, and since this is an off-road vehicle, right, this is going to be used to run around on potentially quite uneven terrain. You want that sort of configuration. If you have it the other way around, all right, then it's more like a more like a sports car. You've got some very hard suspension, and it will be quite prone to rolling on pretty much any sort of terrain. So yeah, we want something like that. The friction, there's conflicting information. But what number you actually need here is kind of, it's changed a lot between versions. So I'm going to leave it sort of on the default and we'll just experiment a little and see how it goes. As far as height offset, we don't want this right on the minimum. All right, we want this somewhere, a little bit in between. We don't want it all the way up here. We don't want it all the way down here. We want it somewhere sort of in between, so there's a little bit of travel in every direction. And we're going to set a pretty aggressive speed limit here, maybe, sort of 80 kilometers an hour. You don't really need to go that fast for it to be really useful already. All right, and the last thing we're going to do is go to our remote control here and turn on the handbrake. All right, so we'll jump out of here, and now we should be able to get rid of this landing gear, and hopefully it doesn't fall on our heads and kill us. Awesome. So let's give this a quick test and we'll just see how it goes. So unfortunately, the way you kind of have to get this set up is kind of go into the K menu and remote control and press control. I wish you could add it to your bar, but that doesn't seem to be possible at the moment. Anyway, let's go and turn off our brake and kind of try and drive this around a little. So we're pretty much at our full speed now, and yeah, it's pretty stable. All right, we just did a 360 there without a problem, and we do have an ore detector on board now, which is really helpful. Yeah, it's a little bit kind of skittish over the terrain, but it's not rolling, which is really important. We're not getting any power generation right now, but I'm just going to go and check out some of these. So we got some iron in this rock. So really what we're trying to get right now is cobalt and nickel. All right, if we got a little bit of each of those, we can make a lot of the early game items very, very easily. Magnesium is really good for ammunition, but doesn't really help us in the early game. There's another rock over there. Now, the advantage of not breaking down the antenna on our lander means I don't actually need to worry about trying to find it later, because it's actually broadcasting its location for up to 2 kilometers. You know, it can be quite popular to tear that down. All right, we don't really need silver yet, but we are going to need it eventually. So since I'm right here, let's actually grab some. So we don't really need a whole lot early on. Probably the biggest thing you could make with silver in the very early game is actually some upgraded tools. But yeah, we'll grab a little bit like that. I'm not going to worry about getting too much. So we'll just get a little bit like that. I don't really care about that, but we'll hang on to the ice because that's useful for hydrogen. Yep, got to remember to remote control. Yes, we just grabbed that little rock and that spun us around because they had the rock under our tires. All right, so there's some gold down there. Let's have a look at what else is here. It looks like it's largely just gold in that area. Do have to be mindful that the all right, there's some nickel perfectly. The distance of what you can see with a small ship is substantially smaller than the distance from a large ship. So that is something you need to be aware of. All right, but this nickel is what we really needed. So certainly in the early game, these little rocks on the surface, very, very helpful because they're very, very easy to access resources. So with the way that mining works in this game, you don't really need to kind of keep the mouse button held down. The way it works is that the mining basically happens, at least with the hand tools, happens instantly. So you only got to keep it held down long enough for it to spawn those rocks. And I keep it held down a little bit longer than I need to for the rocks to spawn, because one of the mods I added at the start there, as long as I am attempting to mine, that is I have my left click held down, it automatically picks up those rocks that spawn. Alright, that helps out a lot. Like, I don't need to constantly stop and pick them up. They're just automatically retrieved. So yeah, we don't need to worry about getting a massive amount, but just, you know, getting a little bit will kind of help us get started. So I'll fill up my inventory just once from this rock for nickel. Because nickel, well, you don't need a massive amount of nickel, to be honest. Iron is what you need most of. So we're nearly full though, so I'll fill my inventory. But you'll see from the cargo containers, there we go, we're full. You'll see from the cargo containers, like they will hold just so much more than what I can. So you see that's not even 10, you know, that's maybe a little bit over 10% full. I'll grab this one little rock that fell down. They do still spawn if your inventory is full. So you do need to be aware of that. But if I can get some cobalt, then the key thing is once you've got cobalt, nickel, and iron, you can make engines or motors, which kind of helps you get a long way towards making just about anything. So we'll check this rock out. I don't think we checked this one before. That's nickel as well. Okay, good to know. Yeah, we are kind of sliding around a little bit. We could probably fix that. If we kind of bump up the friction a little bit. All right, because we were sliding. Yeah, no, okay. That's not a good idea. That was not a good idea. Let's bump the friction back down. About 25, I think it was. All right, that's silver. That's the... Whoa. Okay, so that is probably not having strong enough suspension because we are now a little bit heavier than what we were before. A little bit more power. But yeah, suspension. I'm not a big fan of wheeled vehicles, at least not small ones. The larger ones, you know, it's a little bit more forgiving, especially since, you know, you don't necessarily want to be going 100 kilometers an hour with them. But, you know, being able to go 80 in a small vehicle does help kind of allow you to scout things out a little bit easier. All right, so that one was iron. So yeah, I'm just trying to find one of these rocks that has some cobalt, and then we'll be pretty much set. So yeah, we're not. It's not really holding a straight line at the moment, unfortunately. So this kind of spinning out everywhere is, you know, the suspension settings not being quite right. All right, we did actually check that one. Yeah, that kind of gripped a little bit more than I would like. We probably need a little bit more damping, to be honest. I think that's basically when that happens, the suspension is basically gripping. Or the suspension is bottoming out. And yeah, so it tends to roll. And if you got a bit more damping, yeah, so that's still not good. So I'll need to play around with these settings and try and find something that works well. It's probably, you know, there'll be some sort of value where the damping is quite high, the strength is probably not quite high enough, or it might be too high. You know, small wheel vehicles are pretty tricky to work with, I've found. Yeah, see, that just kind of span out on its own, which is not good. All right, but anyway, I'm going to end the episode here because we've kind of been going for quite a while, just getting this this early start. And so in between episodes, I'll scout out a few resources and you know, mark some locations so we've got easier access to them. For now, we'll just kind of park our little rover up here, and because we're not going to be using it for a little bit, we'll set these onto recharge. Yep, it complains about no fuel, but it'll be fine. So we'll let that recharge the batteries while it has some light. And I'll see you on the next episode. So thank you for watching, and as always, have a good one.